housekeeping items. Like I just said, a recording will go out in an email tomorrow, as well as a PDF of the slides. And if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. Matt and I can see the chat, but we'd prefer you put the questions in the Q&A. So I see a lot of people are putting comments and stuff in the chat, but please put it in the Q&A. Okay.
And you can remain anonymous in there as well. So if you have a personal question, you don't want to put your name behind, you have the option. So just pop that in the Q&A so everybody can benefit. And again, along with the recording, you'll get these questions and the answers. And for those that can't make it live tonight, same deal. So that's the best way to handle that piece. And again, you can remain anonymous if that's your preference.
All right. Okay. Well, let's get going here. Again, welcome to Save Thousands on the Cost of College. I want to kick off tonight with a story. I'm going to intro myself and then I'm going to let Matt introduce himself as well. So one night I'm laying in bed and I'm listening to my kids who were seniors in high school at the time. They're twins, Shannon and Brennan, and they're downstairs and they're just laughing and having a great time. And I sit up and I realize that I'm sobbing. And I turn to my husband and I say to him, you know what? We're not going to hear this laughter next year when the kids are in college. And I remember the feeling that I had that night like it was yesterday. And the reason I'm sharing this is that I think a lot of you on this webinar, a lot of parents, you're kind of in that chapter. You might have a child who's a senior and you're really close to finishing all of this. But even if you have a high school kid, it's the chapter you're in and it's kind of where you are. And I'm here to tell you that you'll get through it. And it's just really this perfect storm of emotions. I think of it like for parents, this is really what you've been doing for 18 years, right? Getting your kids ready to kind of take that half step to being totally on their own, right? And so it's exciting, but at the same time, it's kind of bittersweet because they're leaving, right? It's the end of a chapter. And then for the kids, super cool, get to make my own decisions, do whatever I want. That's all really exciting. But most kids, even if they don't want to admit it, it's a little scary, right? So it's really kind of this, as I said, perfect storm of emotion. So I'm here to tell you, I get it. I've been there and you'll get through it. So when my kids hit high school, as many of you probably have done, you start thinking about college, right? So Bill, my husband, and I were like, all right, we got to get into this deep dive into college because they're in high school. And I realized really quickly how much more complicated and confusing this whole process is, which I'm sure a lot of you have realized as well, right? But the other thing that I realized was a lot of my friends and colleagues were not doing a deep dive and they were kind of drifting through this process. And I had this aha moment that I could combine this decade of experience that I had at the time in financial planning and wealth management with my college financial planning expertise, and I could really impact families even more. And so that's what I did. I started a company called Way to the Quad in 2014. And my mission was really to help families navigate this whole, what I affectionately call crazy world of financial aid, and kind of understand where they fit and be able to find affordable schools and set expectations for their kids. So since 2014, I've worked closely with hundreds of families. I've spoken and hopefully impacted thousands of families. And last month, I made another really exciting change in my career path. And I joined a company called College Aid Pro. One of the founders, Matt Carpenter, is with me tonight. And this is a group of guys that started this company. And I was fortunate enough to meet them when they were developing this amazing software that's been integral to my impacting families. And I was fortunate enough to be able to beta test it. So I got to know them, and long story short, it just, after years of knowing them, it was just a perfect fit for me to join them. So I still get to do all the stuff I love and impact families. And so Matt, why don't you just take a few minutes, just share a little bit about yourself, and then we will kick it off.
Yeah, sure. And I have like Somewhat similar story, I guess, coming at it from a different way. So my oldest right now she'll be 7. So I have a ways to go before I'm sending anybody off to college that's my kid, but I've done it at least thousands of times over with other families that I've worked with, because I've done this for my entire career. And as Peg was talking, telling her story, it kind of reminds me of a conversation that I have all the time. And that's almost every family that I work with. When I talk to them and I'm telling them about my family, they're like, oh my God, you're going to blink and you're going to be sending your daughter off to college. And I hear that multiple times a day since she's been born, to the point where I believe it. And I try to take that to heart and, be like, okay, I can really see that. And even the tricky times, try to embrace them. And I'll kind of put that right back to parents, because we always do a survey at the end of the year. And this is what I was thinking of that you just said, Peg, where we'll ask parents if you could go back to the beginning of this year, right? So we do this survey once basically the kids are off to college for freshman year, fall semester. If you could go back a year from now, what advice would you give yourself now that you've just been through the gauntlet? And almost without fail, or by far the most common answer is, I'd tell myself to basically care less about how this admissions piece plays out, care less about the stressors of the financial aid craziness and deadlines, and try to remember that this is my last year with my kid under my roof before they're gone, for the rest of their lives. Obviously not gone, but you know what I'm saying? So try to remember that, right? Easier said than done. I get it. Everybody's unbelievably freaked out. And I think between the two of us, we share a ton of empathy for what you're going through. And the big idea tonight is to hopefully alleviate at least the fear of the unknown, right? I think that's what causes so much nerves is, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Am I going to screw up? Did I save enough? Everybody's trying to do the best they can, especially for their kids, right? So you're in good hands, right? I've been doing this my entire career, about 20 years. I started a company based on my own family's experience, being the oldest of 3, having 2 working parents, doing the best they could, but didn't know what the hell they were doing. So we tried to figure out a better way to do it, and had some success, and that business grew into a software that Peg talked about called J Pro. And we've just been huge fans of Peg from afar for many years, and kind of have pursued her and finally figured out a way to get her formally on our team. So we're psyched to be rowing in the same direction, at least formally, because we've had the same mission since we've known each other, which I think is why we hit it off out of the gate. So you're in great hands with her tonight. Again, I'm just going to be on the background. Once Peg gets into content, I'm going to shut my camera off. Please go crazy in the Q&A. I cannot be stumped. I'm just going to go on record. I cannot be stumped. So I dare you to try to stump me. And there's inevitably going to be more questions, and you're going to think of some things tomorrow that you forgot to ask tonight. Like Peg said, you're going to get the recordings. You're going to have an opportunity to get on the software yourselves eventually. And anybody who wants to meet on a one-on-one basis with Peg, you have a chance to do that as well. So we'll remind you at the end here, but in the meantime, we'll take good care of you. And I will see you at the end here.
All right, so let's kick this off. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so here we are. All right, just so you have a visual, there's my kids. This is actually when they were seniors in high school, and 2 of my canine kids that I had at the time. So just so you have a visual. So as I said in my intro, so I've helped hundreds of families, and I'm very comfortable saying like you, because if any of these things that I'm about to put up kind of resonate with you, it's okay. If you think I make tons of money, there's nothing I can do. I'm struggling to get by. I'm divorced or separated. I feel guilty that I haven't saved enough, or I've waited till the last minute, the beat up sort of thing. And if any of those sound familiar, we're all good. Like, take a deep breath. Parent to parent, deep breaths are the best thing in this process. Take a deep breath. Kudos to you for being here, and let's start learning. So my commitment to you tonight is to teach you how to approach this college buying process in a proactive way, as opposed to being reactive to the colleges. And I want to share a story so you know what I mean by reactive. So I had a mom several springs ago call me that I didn't know. And she was really excited because her son got into his dream school. And she said, and they gave him $20,000 a year of a discount. And we're going to talk about all of this tonight, but they expect me to pay 40 and I don't have it. Peg, can you help me? Well, at this point, this mom is reacting. She's reacting to what the colleges are telling her she has to pay, and she's not prepared. And so I don't want you guys to be in that situation. I want you to be proactive in how you approach this so you can avoid that situation. And it's a pretty common situation in the spring of seniors before they finish high school. So I know it sounds a little cheesy, but it's really, really true. The more educated you are and the more you understand financial aid and where you fit, the better off you are when you're on college visits. You'll know the questions to ask, and you'll know how to kind of see through some of the marketing that the colleges do. The colleges are nonprofits, most of them, but they really, really are businesses, and they know what they're doing, right? Okay, so let's jump in here. So I always tell families that there's three kinds of fit in my mind. There's academic, of course, people focus on that. What do you want to major in, right? Personal, do you want a big school, small school? You want a Greek system? You want big football on the weekends? But there's also financial fit, and all three are important. So looking at all three together is kind of that perfect trifecta. And so many times the financial is an afterthought, or like I said in my intro, it's just drifting, right? So you want to keep that in mind. All three of these fits are very important. So this is the process that I kind of coined when I was going through it with my kids, right? And tried to make, some kind of fun names for some of these steps that maybe aren't so much fun, right? So I call it Journey to College Made Easy. And all of you are going to go through this process. You might be in different parts of the process, depending on if I have senior parents here, then you've probably cut through some of it. But tonight, this is kind of the guide. I'm going to hit on all of these, of course, at a very high level, because, we're here for an hour, right? But I just want to have you see where we're going and give you kind of a framework, because sometimes you're in this, you don't know what's coming up next. And it's kind of nice that, as Matt said, we're trying to relieve stress for everyone. Knowing what comes ahead should help do that. So let's jump into the first one, what I call pay less for college. This is where you're kind of learning, understanding financial aid, and then beginning to see where you might fit. But the first thing is understanding how this whole thing works and how college is priced. So I'm going to tell you that it's a buyer's market, and you might be sitting there kind of rolling your eyes. I can't see any of you, and wondering, what is she talking about? There's no way it's a buyer's market. Well, I'm going to show you, I'm going to explain, right? And I really, really don't want you to stress about these high sticker prices, these costs of attendance. If you've got kids in high school, you're paying attention, right? The most expensive schools are over $85,000 a year, full price, right? It's crazy. But I don't want you to shop based on the sticker price. And let me show you an example to kind of put my money where my mouth is and really show you. This was an actual student of mine several years ago. So the student got their package from a public school and a private school. So if you look where the red box is now, the public school was $27,000 full price. Private school, almost 51. So it would be logical to look at that and say, wow, we're in a little bit over 100,000 or over 200. The $200,000 school's out. There's no way we can afford that. Well, I want to show you what happened with the student and what they really were expected to pay. So this family had an expected family contribution, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, of $21,500. And at the end of the day, the package that this student got, if you look right at the bottom, and this is no loans are included, this is just money they have to pay. The public school, they're paying the same thing. They got some loans, right? But look what happened to the private school. That price, that net cost to that family went down to $30,000. So that's a really different conversation to have. It's a $3,000 delta instead of almost double. And when, pre-COVID, when we used to speak in live, I'd have people raise their hand in the audience and say, yep, that happened to my son. This happens. It's not a rare occurrence. So it's counterintuitive, but don't throw out those high sticker price schools, because depending on the situation, it could end up being close to the price of a lower price school. So How is this happening? Like I said, it's counterintuitive. Well, I want to show you a few numbers here. So Nakubo, this organization, did a study covering a decade from '08 to 2018. And if you look on the far left, tuition went up almost 47% over that decade. But look at the discounting, what we're going to call discounting. The colleges discounted their cost by 91%, much higher percentage, which gives you an 18% net revenue. I mean, net tuition rate, right? So not nearly as much as what you would think at the beginning. And this is what's happening. So this is what I want to talk to you about tonight so that you can realize these discounts. So how do colleges do this? They do this in one of two ways. They're either offering need-based / self-help, and that means work study or loans, but need-based grants, usually they're called grants, based on need, right? Based on if you have financial needs. So we're going to talk about that. And then they also offer merit aid, which is non-need-based aid. So we're going to look at both of these ways that they discount. So let's talk about need-based aid first. Very simple equation that this whole thing really boils down to. They take their costs of attendance, their sticker price, they take away this expected family contribution, which I'm going to elaborate on in a minute. And that's how they figure out financial need. So if the school costs 80 and you have an EFC of 60, you have 20,000 of need. If your EFC is 150,000, well, thank God no schools cost that. You don't have any financial need. Okay. So let's talk about the components: cost of attendance, tuition and fees, room and board, books, supplies. And then all the schools have one or two more line items. It could be transportation and personal expenses, or they mush them together, right? So that's the whole enchilada. That is what I keep calling the sticker price. So it's not just tuition, right? It's all these different pieces. What is an expected family contribution? So what this is it's the minimum annual amount a student is expected to put toward the cost of college. And I'm going to emphasize the two words minimum and annual, because it doesn't mean that's all you're going to be expected to pay. It's only the minimum, and it is an annual number. So as I shared, I've been doing this for quite a few years, and there's been one parent, and it was about 3 weeks ago, who, when she saw her estimates of her EFC, said, yeah, that makes sense. Everybody else, falls off their chair. They're mad, they're laughing. They're just like, how does a college think I can afford that amount of money? So that's why it's important to dial this in and understand what your EFCs are. There's 3 different methodologies, and we're going to touch on 2 tonight. I'm actually going to take you into the software, and I'm going to show you these EFCs, because this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. You got to understand these numbers for your family. So what are the main drivers when this is calculated? By far, the biggest driver is parental income. Okay. And if you make a nice living, I keep telling people, as I do this for a living, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But if you make a nice living, that can creep up your EFC for sure. Parent non-retirement assets are thrown into the mix, right? So as I'm talking, you can be thinking about your family. If you have a lot of money in a non-retirement account, right? That's not an IRA or 401k. Kids' income and assets can be a big driver percentage-wise, how they're looked at. But fortunately, most kids don't have a lot of that, so it doesn't really come into play as often. One thing that's different about the financial aid world versus the tax world is pre-tax retirement contributions get added back into this formula unless it's mandatory by your employer. So that's a nuance that a lot of people would just not know. And then if you have multiple kids in school, like I did, that can be a positive. That's going to go away in a couple of years if the legislation holds and things don't change. But for the next couple of years, that's still a big factor. So if you have a junior and a senior kind of thing.
And let me just, can I butt in real quick?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because we got that question a few times. What about what's going to happen when I have multiple kids in school? What about twins, right? And right now, the formula works the way that it should. So for example, when we're talking about that EFC figure, if your EFC is 20,000, based on your income and assets, in the following year, everything's about the same. But now your younger one is in college as well. the EFC is still going to be $20,000, but now it's divided evenly between the two kids, right? That's how it works right now, kind of how it should. That's going away from the formula. If this rule, it already got passed by the Department of Education. It's not supposed to go into effect until 2023. So just like I popped in the Q&A, I actually started a petition several months ago that's got over $50,000 signatures. So it'd be awesome. I'm going to put it in the chat again here. But anybody that wants to sign that and share it, please do, because you're going to benefit from it if we can prevent this from going through. Because it's going to be a really bad thing for a lot of families that, you know, fall into this bucket. So so that's all. I just wanted to kind of reiterate on that. So I popped it in the chat, and it's in the Q&A as well for anybody that's willing and able to sign and share it. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely pop in there. If you search under FAFSA, Matt will come up and give it your signature if you don't want that to happen. So, okay. So now let's talk about the second step. This is probably not the most fun step. It's basically financial aid forms, right? So if you have a senior, you're into the thick of this right now, right? So let's talk about this. So there's two financial aid forms, and the first one is called the FAFSA, which stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. And the key highlights here are on the FAFSA, retirement accounts are not included. So if you've been a really good saver and socked away a lot of money in 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, that is awesome, right? You won't have to, well, you don't disclose it on the FAFSA, the other form asks, but it's not included in the calculation basically. And your primary home equity. So the home you live in, the market value minus any mortgage, HELOC that you have, that's your equity. That is not included in this equation. And that can be a big deal for people throughout the country, right? And then if you are a business owner and it's a family-owned business with less than 100 full-time employees, the value of that business is not on the table. That's another one of those things that's going to go away with the new legislation. But for the next couple of years, it's still in play. Income from your business that's on your tax return is part of your income. But if your business has value, inventory, and you have office space or equipment, that's off the table. So those are some things specific. Those are the highlights. There's a few other things, but those are the highlights. Another huge thing about the FAFSA, if you are divorced or separated, the FAFSA only asks for information from the custodial parent, which is the parent where the child has spent the most time on a year look back from when you submit the forms. So this is a really, really major planning opportunity. This is another one that is going, the definition of custodial parent is going to change in a couple of years. So just, you know, put that in your head if you're divorced, that's something you're going to want to understand, but because that's going to change as well. But let me give you an example of how impactful this can be. This was clients that I had, Barbie and Ken. Mom did not make much money, did not have a home, and not much in assets, right? Dad was kind of the flip side, right? More income, owned a home. And you look at the bottom, two different EFCs are calculated, one with just mom as the custodial parent and one with both of them. And you can see the tremendous difference. The father was shocked by this. So it is a planning opportunity. It is something for you to understand. So basically, I'm a planner by background. And to me, there's just so many, planning is so important. And so I love dogs. You already saw dogs. Whenever there's a big planning opportunity I'm talking about, I throw up a slide with a big dog, because who doesn't want to see a cute dog? That was one of my dogs, Sal, who's not with us anymore, but massive opportunity for divorced and separated families for the next couple of years. So really understand how this can impact your family. Okay, so at this point, I've shared a lot of information, and you might be thinking, okay, well, am I eligible for need-based aid? Or I don't think I'm eligible. I make too much money. Or I think I am. Well, what you're really asking is, what are my EFCs? What are the estimates of my EFCs? So I want to take a minute and hop over in our software, and I want to talk about this for a few minutes. So this is a sample client, obviously. And here's the 3 EFCs for this family. And this is a FAFSA EFC called a federal. And there's a second form I'm going to talk about in a minute called the CSS Profile. And that's an institutional EFC that's calculated from that financial aid form. But I want to show you the impact that income and assets can really have on an equation. So if we look here, this family in my example makes 150,000. Well, say this family was impacted negatively with COVID, which is very common right now, right? So say their income actually dropped for a year because of different things. Look what just happened to that EFC. It went from 39 to 16,000, right? And this was 55,000. So really, really big difference. So let me put that back. These are the kind of things you, like I said earlier, this is the tip of the iceberg. You got to know this stuff. So let's look at assets. As I said, non-retirement assets. They can be very impactful in this calculation. So say this family, instead of having 100,000, remember we got 39 and 55 up there, has $500,000 in non-retirement assets. Look at those EFCs shoot up, right? So again, I can't emphasize enough to have this dialed in to understand your different EFCs and how they're calculated, and actually how schools are different on how they calculate these things. And I'm going to get into that in a minute with the CSS profile. So let's hop back over to my slides for a minute here. Okay. So you're going to figure out what your EFCs are, and then you're going to know if you're eligible for need-based aid, right? Because you're going to be looking at different school costs and you know your EFC, or you've got some estimates. So the second form that, I don't know, it's about, maybe Matt knows exactly, it's about 200 schools, maybe a little bit more than 200 schools. They require this form on top of the FAFSA, not in lieu of the FAFSA. You still have to submit the FAFSA for federal aid consideration, but they require this second form called the CSS Profile, so that they are going to calculate a second EFC to decide how they're going to give out their endowment money. And remember, endowment money is where these discounts come from, right? It's the best source of these discounts. So this is administered by College Board. So if your kids have taken the PSAT, they're into AP classes, SAT, that's all College Board, right? So you log in with their login. That's how you get in. As I said, it's less than 300 colleges require this. The key differences between the FAFSA and the CSS as far as calculation of an EFC is, more often than not, most of the time, primary home equity is on the table. So they'll look at that as an asset that parents can tap. The non-custodial parent, again, more often than not, is going to be a part of this equation. They're going to have a separate form that they'll have the two parents fill out and submit privately, right, to College Board. And then businesses, if you have a business, got a lot of value, they're going to want to know all about your businesses. So if you're sitting there thinking about yourself, you might think, oh, wow, yeah, I got a lot of equity in my home. This could really affect an EFC and make it much different than a federal EFC from a FAFSA only school. And then do these colleges within the CSS profile methodology do the same thing? Absolutely not. That would just be way too easy. Honestly, the best answer, if I had to record an answer to a question for parents, and I'm sure that Matt would agree with me, the best answer I can give for most questions is it depends, because it absolutely does. It depends on the student. It depends on the family's financials. It depends on the college and what they're looking for and how they do things. Did you?
Yeah, and if I may, Peg, because we're getting a few questions around these divorce and separated situations, essentially two household scenarios, right? And I would absolutely echo what Peg is saying there, and it's frustrating, right? You don't want to hear, well, it depends, and every situation is different, and every college is different, and it changes each year. But that's the absolute truth. It's such a fluid process, and a lot of subjectivity that's involved, right? But just a couple more things to really reiterate what Peg said, because I think, again, it's confusing, right? And it doesn't make sense when it comes to these divorce separated situations. So as of today, it's only one household completes the FAFSA, and it's the household of the custodial parent. And if that parent is remarried, it's the step parent's information goes on there as well. For all intents and purposes, it's as if they're treated like the biological parent. And if it's a college only requires a FAFSA, it's as if the actual biological parent from the other household doesn't exist. And that's just the way the formula works today, is kind of wonky as that is. And to Peg's point, most of these colleges that require the CSS profile, which generally speaking are a lot of these more popular private colleges, yes, they're going to put the most emphasis and require the information from the custodial household, but they're also going to need the details, and the non-custodial household will complete their own application, but you guys won't see one another's information. I know that's a big concern. Is my ex-spouse going to see the information? And the answer is no. The college will get it from each of you separately, and they will serve as a firewall there. So you can feel good about that. The other thing here that's really mission critical, like Peg talked about, is if you're a family that falls into the situation somewhere, use it to your advantage, right? And just because a college is a private college that requires a CSS profile, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to require the information from the non-custodial parent, right? For example, the University of Chicago, Vanderbilt out here on the East Coast. I mean, these are some really amazing, really popular schools. They only look at the custodial household. So there are cases where if you have a really smart kid, a 2-household family that's custodial household, does not have a high income, high assets, you're going to go there for an incredible deal. So hopefully that kind of further clarifies some questions that were coming up there, Peg.
Okay, great. Okay, so another planning opportunity. It doesn't mean that CSS profile schools are bad, right? You just want to have your eyes wide open. You want to know if a school is a FAFSA school only, or if it requires the CSS profile. So just understanding that piece, because sometimes the CSS profile schools are more generous in certain ways. And so that sticker price will drop more. So these are all the things you want to be thinking about. So that's need-based aid, and that's the 2 financial aid forms. You are submitting those forms so that they can calculate these EFCs. The very straightforward, transparent federal EFC from the FAFSA, and the more murky institutional EFC that each college is going to calculate on their own for the second EFC. But now let's jump into merit aid, because merit aid is the non-need-based aid, right? And honestly, in the years I've been doing this work, I'd say at least half of the families I've worked with, they don't have any need-based aid eligibility, but they still don't have $80,000 to pay per year. And even if they did, they don't want to spend that amount of money. They still want to get discounts. They still want to find a good academic, personal, and financial fit school for their kids. So merit aid might be the name of the game, right, for discount. So it's important to understand what it is. So the key difference as far as where it comes from at the schools, it comes from the Office of Admissions, right? It's not financial aid where the need-based aid comes from. And what merit aid truly is, it's an enticement for the student to attend. Your child sends in their application, this university or college really wants your child, accepts them, sends out a letter, congratulations, we'd love to have you on campus this coming fall, and you got a scholarship for a provost scholarship for $80,000. What they're telling you is, we just gave you merit aid of $20,000 a year. So they are starting that discounting process. They have no idea about your ability to pay, and they honestly don't care. They want the student and they want to start the discounting, and they're competing with their neighbors down the road, right? So if their neighbors down the road are doing it, they got to do it, and they got to lower the sticker price. The net revenue is really what colleges, what they're looking at, right? So keep that in mind. It's usually based on grades and test scores, although there can be talent, leadership, other things. And I know this question will be popped in. Test scores, we're kind of coming out of it a little bit, but a lot of kids still don't have test scores. And many schools are test optional, meaning you can be admitted without the test scores. So the colleges are absolutely, maybe not every single one in the country, but they are giving out merit aid based on GPA, and they might even make up other requirements since they know they're not going to get test scores from a lot of kids. So just keep that in mind. Test scores are not necessary at most schools to get this merit aid. So don't have that stressor that your kids got to take the test, right? And as usual, there's different awarding methodologies depending on the school. So let's look at that for a minute. So there's some schools, like the schools on the left, just a few examples, that offer really nice merit-based aid, right? From the Office of Admissions. And they don't have to only be private schools, right? You see University of Alabama there. They are really trying to attract smart out-of-state kids. So if you've got a certain GPA, and used to be ACT, and I'm sure it'll go back to that at some point, you can get some really, really nice money. And I'm talking 5 figures when we're talking about the merit aid here, right? Times 4 years, okay? So those are the kind of schools you want to know about if you're one of those families where merit is the name of the game, right? But then there's other schools that maybe offer 0 merit or teeny bit, right? But they're amazing at meeting need. They meet 100% of need for every kid on campus all 4 years, right? And there's some examples of those schools on the right. And that's great if you have need-based aid. But if you don't, and your child is looking at those schools, that's okay. But you need to realize, hey, it doesn't matter if your child has perfect SATs and a 4.0 unweighted average. That's not going to get your child any merit aid at those schools. Most of the kids that apply to those schools have really, really good grades and test scores. So that's not how they do it. And you just have to understand that, right? Again, have your eyes wide open and do your due diligence. That's where it's at, okay? Another planning opportunity, right? Need-based schools, merit, and it's not one or the other. A lot of schools give some need, a lot of schools give some merit. So it's not, I'll tell you right now, the Ivies and the Stanfords of the world, 0 merit. And it really, really don't kid yourself, right? It's not going to happen. They don't give merit aid. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so at this point, you might be thinking, okay, that's great. So now I understand need-based aid, I understand merit aid. So how do I, if all these schools are different, how do I know how they're offering discounts? And if merit is the name of the game, how do I find out about merit and who's giving the good merit that I'm going to need? So let's go in here, back in the software, let's look at a couple schools just so I can kind of give you an idea of how this works. So let's look at a school like Yale. So very selective. And that's one of those schools that I just mentioned that is wonderful at meeting need, right? And almost all of it is free money. There's no loans and work study in there. It's almost all grants. Yale can afford it, right? They have a huge endowment. But then when you get to this next area here, percent receiving non-need, zip. Just like I said, they're an Ivy League school. They're not going to offer merit aid. So keep that in mind. This is really important information. They use a methodology consensus that's a subset of the institutional methodology. We're not going to get in the weeds on that. But if you had high home equity, that could be a school that could actually be much cheaper for you. So these are all these planning things that I'm trying to plant seeds on. And in our tool too, I'll just show, because I think this is great. There's outcome data, because you're wondering, if I spend all this money, what's my child going to come out and make, right? There is a little bit of return on investment look here, but that's how Yale looks. So now let's look at a school that's different. So a school like Chapman, still a private school, very popular school out on the West Coast for a lot of kids. So Chapman only requires the FAFSA. So I'm pointing that out because if you see up here, the EFCs that we talked about before, that's how the need is going to pop in, right? And it can be different with different EFCs, but they meet about 3/4 of need. Most schools can't afford 100%, right? Because it's a lot of endowment money, right? And about half of it is with grants. But look at the percent of kids that are getting the merit aid, right? Almost 20%, and the average is like $20,500 a year annual. And then when you scroll down here, you can check out the different merit. And I've done this before, I hopped on, but with this family, it's like, yep, this kid is looking, when you compare the stats, looking like this student could get 25,000 a year. So I just want to show that there's a bunch of different schools here, and we could take more time, but we don't have time. But I just wanted to contrast those two private schools and how different they function to make sure that you guys understand this is something that you want to be looking into. Okay, so let's hop back over here to my presentation. So how does this all work? What's the timeline? So you're going to be answering questions about income and assets, right? So the income is done in a way called something called prior year. President Obama put this into place. So basically, it's a 2-year look back for income. So if you have a senior right now, your child's going to school in 2022, easiest way to remember is just subtract 2 from that year. That's your tax year that matters. That's the tax year. If you're not into the forms yet, senior parents, you're going to be in there soon. You're going to notice all the questions on the FAFSA are about 2020, which is kind of long gone, right? It's pretty far in the rearview mirror, but it is what it is. So it's a 2-year look back. Assets, on the other hand, are current. So the letter of the law is literally the day you hit submit, the value of your assets. I don't know that all parents actually look up the exact value that day, but the point is there's time to make changes if there are things you can do with assets, spend money down that you're going to spend anyways, different kind of strategies. You have time, whereas the income is a 2-year look back, and the forms go live October 1. FAFSA is always October 1, just went live a little bit ago. The CSS sometimes goes live a little earlier in September. It has the last few years, but definitely by October 1 for the CSS as well. So that's another planning opportunity just to understand prior year, because if I have any sophomore parents here, realize that the tax year that you're going to be asked about when you do that first FAFSA that seems so far in the future is starting in January. So you don't want to inflate your income, right? If you get a bonus or you get a promotion, of course, you're going to take it, right? But don't create capital gains and different things that don't need to happen because it's going to haunt you later. So just keep that in mind, okay? So that's the first 2 steps. This third step, I think, is the best step of all of them, right? You're in. This is when your kid is getting accepted, right? You're getting all these acceptances and you're getting what's called financial aid award letters. I am not going to do a slide on this. I just want the key takeaway here is you should be analyzing these award letters. And again, they're different from school to school. They don't have a common format, so they can be confusing, but you want to make sure you understand them and what you're signing up for. And the other piece is you want to understand them because you might want to reach out to the school and appeal. And the main takeaway here is, yes, you can appeal. Just like most things in life, there's a right way to do it and maybe a not so good way to do it. But you definitely can appeal for need-based aid as well as merit aid. Need-based aid statistically tends to be easier if you've got a rationale to really appeal on. But I've helped a lot of families appeal for merit aid and have been successful, or for more merit aid. So it's a whole strategy in and of itself. But that's the key takeaway. Yes, you can appeal, and no, they will not rescind your child's admission because you asked for more money. The worst thing that's going to happen is they say no. So you should do your homework and do it correctly. But that's what that step is all about. And that's starting, February, March of your child's senior year. Okay, that's that piece. Now, the last step is called your adventure awaits. So this is end of senior year. You're down to, you got your short list, you appealed, maybe got some extra money, and you've got it all laid out. This is really when you want to dial this in. When you make this final decision, you want to really understand what this is going to cost you for 4 years. I'll also say at the beginning of the process, in the Pay Less for College first step, as you're building the list, you want to look at it in a 4-year window as well. So I want to take a minute here and show you what I mean by this. This is, we call it our how to pay report. It's a 4-year cash flow, but how to pay sounds a lot better, right? So these are the key components here. You want to look at what the college costs, the sticker price, right? So this is Chapman that we were talking about before. So for this family, Chapman all in for 4 years is $335,000. That's a big piece of change, right? Then what we planned for, and we'll just pretend that this is really what happened with this family, this student got this $25,000 merit award. So even though they had need, the merit actually was more than the need. So they paid less than their EFC because the merit was so big, right? So they get a $100,000 discount from Chapman, which is amazing. So now they're down to $235,000, right? Then this piece comes in called We call it college pre-approval. So you think about mortgage pre-approval. When you go to buy a house, you figure out what you can afford before you go shopping. All of us on the College Aid Pro team would love it if everybody, all families did this before you go shopping. Figure out what you can afford. But it comes into this 4-year cash flow because, and we're not going to get in the weeds on all the pieces, but there's different buckets of money you might have saved in. There might be outside help and cash flow. And you bring all this together, and that's what you can bring to the table, right? Every college is going to expect you to pay something unless you literally have nothing, right? So with this family's example, they can bring almost $23,000 to the table over those 4 years. So that lowers the bottom line to about $112,500. That's the funding gap, right? That's still a pretty big funding gap, right? So at that point, you want to look at it and say, there's different ways to meet funding gaps. And that's when loans come in for families. And I'm not going to go deep into all different kinds of loans, but I do want to take a minute and talk about the main student loan, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there around this. But before I leave this, I can't emphasize enough that you really want to look at this in this way when you're building the college list and when you're making that final decision. It'll really help you sleep at night. Trust me on that. So, okay. So now I'm going to pop back over here and let's look at the one kind of student loan that I want to stress tonight. So it's called a direct student loan. It used to be called a Stafford. So you might see that word floating around a little bit still. And the only thing you need to do as a family is submit that FAFSA and your student will automatically be eligible. These are loans from the federal government. They're encouraging education, right? They're giving a student a loan. It is your child's loan under their social security number alone. You are not on the hook for this. There's no co-signing. And there's two different types of these loans. There's a subsidized loan or an unsubsidized loan. So if you have financial need that we've talked about, you will get part of the award will be in a subsidized version, which means there's no interest until 6 months after your child graduates, right? It's kind of a no-brainer in a lot of ways, right? If you pay it off the day after graduation, it's the principal of the loan that your child took out potentially over those 4 years. There are maximums that the government puts on this. So freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year, you can see these numbers on the left. Those are the maximum amounts, unless your child is independent, which is not the norm, that a student can get awarded for a subsidized loan. So if you have $3,500 in financial need, most colleges are going to award that. And that's going to come in on that financial aid award letter I was talking about. And they'll always give you an extra $2,000 of unsubsidized loans, which it's the same loan, just interest starts accruing when you take the loan out, like a regular loan. So if you have need, what you'll see on the award letter is $3,500 of subsidized, $2,000 of unsubsidized. So the total amount of debt that your child can get into if they take the maximums every year is $27,000. So in my opinion, that's a reasonable amount of money to go into debt for a good 4-year education. I'm stressing 4-year. You don't want it to be more than 4, right? My daughter, who has a master's in social work, if she didn't take out that much debt, but if she did, I would have been comfortable. And that's a really low paying job when you get out, right? But kids coming out in computer science or engineering it will have much higher starting salaries. A key thing here is that it's use it or lose it. So again, back to that 4-year, you really want to look at this, because I've had families through the years that have a 529, they spend it down, and then junior year, like, oh, I'm out of money. Can I go back and get those really good lower interest rate loans? And you cannot. So if you're not going to accept these in a given year, make sure that's part of your college funding strategy. And then as far as interest rates, it changes every year. It's based on the 10-year treasury note. So last year it was about 1% lower, right? So depending on what goes on with the economy and what the Federal Reserve does, the interest rate for kids that are in college right now for this year, 3.734. So this is going to be the lowest interest you're probably going to find, right? It's a fixed interest rate. And then the federal government has some nice pieces to it, some loan forgiveness and different things because it's a federal loan. So there's parent loans out there that are federal, and there's also outside student loans. But you're going to be co-signing, and just realize those are the three main areas. There's also state loans, but this one is really your student's debt alone. And the other big perk of this is that your child develops a credit history. So they take it out. It doesn't matter who helps pay it back. Anybody can, grandma. But if it's paid back on time or early, they're developing a credit history. And believe me, when they get out of college, they want to move into apartments with their friends, you're going to get pinged to co-sign leases if they have no credit history. So that's another positive of this loan. So that's a key piece when you've got those funding gaps that I showed you. So this is another big planning opportunity. Nobody likes debt, right? I don't own my home free and clear, right? I didn't have a briefcase of cash. So sometimes you have to take on debt, but the whole thing is reasonable amount of debt. And you really have to keep that in mind when you're working with your child, because they don't understand debt. And as parents, most of us do, right? Okay. So now we've gone through this whole process. We pretty much, you're at a very high level, but I hope this has really helped for you to kind of see where we're going here, right? And where you are, depending on the age of your child. I'll just go back here one, where you are in this process. So I want to wrap this up with just finishing my story, right, with my kids. So here's my kids graduating from high school, the Space Needles up at the tippy top there. So I live outside of Seattle, and I did this with them. And both my kids were flown out to a school in Pennsylvania for a weekend in April before they had to make their decision. And of course, my son came back, Brennan, and he wanted to go there because he just had so much fun, right? That's why the college does it. And we sat down with our how to pay report, our 4-year cash flow, and the school out there was $70,000 more. And we just looked at him and said, hey, you like this other school just as much. And I knew it was a better fit, but I didn't say that, being mom. And he just looked at us and said, all right, I'm good. And he went to the other school, had a great experience. So this does work, and it helps you set expectations. Like I've said, avoid some of the stress for the kids. It's just, and that's what's the most important thing, your relationship with your kids. It's way more important than money and all this other crazy stuff that we all get stressed about, right? So my kids are out of college now. They both came back to Seattle, which was lovely because they went to school far away, and they are living on their own with their friends, and they are supporting themselves, and they thrived. And you guys can all have that. You really, really can. And with that in mind, I just want to circle back that at CAP, we are developing a free version of our software geared just to families like you. We really want to impact a lot of families, get this in the hands of a lot of families. So this is something from being on this webinar that you are automatically going to have access to. It's coming out, I'm not going to say any day now, but very soon, very soon. Matt could probably speak to that timeline a little better. I don't want to, I want to under promise, not over promise, but it's coming out momentarily. You all will have access to this. If during the webinar, there's some questions that are just kind of grinding at you and you feel like support on a one-on-one basis, a strategy call with me would be really supportive for where you are. We're happy to help you out there too. And in the follow-up email that we've mentioned with the recording and the slides, we'll put some information in there. And definitely be on the lookout for this email that will come out giving you access to the software, so you can get in there and see your EFCs, see some information on 3 schools, your child's top 3 schools, and you can see what forms they require. All this stuff that we talked about tonight that kind of can get you going in this process. Did you want to chime in on that, Matt?
Awesome, Peg. Great job, first of all. Yeah, so just I'll just kind of piggyback on what Peg said there. And again, you'll tomorrow you're going to have access to all of this, which means the slides, the recording, transcription, all the Q&A. And then if you want to meet on a one-on-one basis and kind of ask anything in particular that you have, or get another set of eyeballs on your forms, whatever it might be, as well as getting access to the software, you'll have the opportunity to do that. Schedule a time tomorrow. And again, to Peg's point, We had hoped by tonight the software, as a matter of fact, by last week, the software for that's specific for families and parents and students was going to be ready, because again, we've worked our butt off to get a free version of that for everybody, but it will be in the coming days. I'll be shocked if it's not by, a week from today, thereabouts. But again, we're going to let you know and show you how to get access to it once that happens. And if you need something before then, you'll have directions on exactly how to do that tomorrow. Just a couple other questions that came up here that I think are probably worth hitting on. I mean, one that was fairly frequent is, okay, I did the FAFSA, I'm doing the FAFSA and the CSS profile. They're only asking me about 2020. 2020 was a good year for us, but it was an anomaly. 2019 wasn't like that. 2021 is not going to be like that. And it's not going to be like that moving forward. What do we do? Now, you have to complete the forms. And for those of you that have seen the FAFSA, you don't get to present your situation in paragraph form. They're going to say, what was your adjusted gross income in 2020? We got to answer the question. However, when we get these offers back from colleges, like Peg said, these are businesses. We want to treat it like we would any other massive investment. There's an element of negotiating. We don't use the word negotiating. We use the word we're appealing for additional financial aid consideration, because these financial aid folks are a very sensitive bunch. So we want to make sure that we're speaking to them in their first language. But generally speaking, especially at these private colleges, there is always some wiggle room, some gray area, some negotiation that can happen. Public schools, specifically state flagship universities, that's usually rare. There usually has to be something really concrete. But sometimes a concrete example could be a 1-year spike in income that we can document that was in fact an anomaly. The point being is that if you're a family that fits into that category, you want to be all over the fact that once we get our offer, we're going to be prepared to go back to these schools, show them documentation that was a 1-year deal. And the ask is that they consider meeting you at a standard year, worst case scenario, maybe somewhere in the middle. So that's kind of the order of operations there. But yeah, it doesn't mean you're completely screwed just because that was the case for 2020 for you all.
Was there anything? I was just kind of looking in the chat here.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of when they're asking for income, they're going to ask you many different ways. The basic thing that drives the formula is the adjusted gross income plus any contributions you made to retirement that you made voluntarily is kind of the total household income that's going to drive the formula. And then they're going to also ask you to differentiate between what's earned income versus total adjusted gross income, right? So what'd you actually get on your W-2 versus what's interest and capital gains, et cetera.
Yeah, somebody asked, we currently have a junior and a senior in high school. When we fill out the form, do we need to set up a whole new account for him? Yeah, each child's going to have, you're doing the FAFSA for each one of your kids, right? So you're going to sit down and do it with your senior. And then when you've got a freshman in college and a senior, you're doing 2. When I had mine twins, I did 2 FAFSAs every year, and it's their FAFSA. It's not yours. You're logging in with you. Technically, they should be with you. It's their FAFSA with their FSA ID and password, and then you're e-signing with yours. So, and you will do it every year. So keep that information. You will be, you'll be experts by the time you're done, because you'll fill this puppy out a bunch of times. So that's that. Yeah.
And just a question here on, two questions here is one, if any citizenship or social security issues, obviously, as you're likely experiencing with many things, this college piece is going to be no different with added layers of complexity. And you may not be able to submit a FAFSA or have it be processed without a social security or citizenship. So we always encourage in that case is to reach out to individual colleges to explain your situation, say, here's what's going on. And again, there's varying degrees in terms of how how much colleges are willing to work with families that fall into this category. And again, it's kind of back to that same thing. It depends on the college. So the recommendation there, but is to reach out directly to these colleges that you're considering applying. Another question here, which what I'll do for just a second, if it'll allow me, let me just share my screen quick here, Peg, because a question is, well, what if I have a student that's not the strongest student in their class? They're not the top of the class. They don't have a very high GPA. They didn't test well. You know, just because that's the case, it doesn't mean there's not going to be schools that could be great fits for your kid that are going to still give merit-based scholarship, right? So this is something that, you know, the advanced search part of the technology allows us to just really search based on that, right? So if I said, I just want to go look at schools in Washington and have them sorted based on who's going to give me the highest merit-based scholarships, we're going to have the ability to do that. And it's regardless of what type of student that we're working with, right? I'm sorry about that. You know, again, this could be, I think for this particular case, I had a decent student in here, but you'd be shocked. A lot of families just dismiss merit-based scholarships because they say, well, my kid's middle of the pack type of deal. Where kind of a little known secret here is that many colleges, and it generally tends to be of the private college variety, anybody that gets accepted, they get a discount, they get a scholarship. You know, they say their sticker price is X amount of dollars, but nobody actually pays that. So again, that's something where we'd like to leverage technology to figure out, regardless of what type of student we're working with, let's go find some schools that are giving them the scholarship, you know, based on what their parameters might be. So again, that's something that you all be able to get your hands on in the coming days here. For those that don't decide to meet with Peg one-on-one. So let's see.
There's a question in the chat. Should I use my parents' FSA ID to input my financial tax information or the student? You're logging into the FAFSA with the student's FSA ID and password. Always, always the student. The parent is only using theirs to e-sign the form on the last page, right before you hit submit. That's the only time the parents is going to be used. And when you get into the FAFSA, you'll see there'll be all these questions about the student, and then you'll get into the parents and you'll show financials of the parents and then financials for the student. So it's pretty well laid out, but that is a common, I've had parents through the years, okay, I logged in. I'm like, well, now you're the student, right? So then they just have to go do it again, right? So it's definitely, the parent only has it to e-sign. That's what it's for.
Yep. Another question here is, so there's a senior in high school and then one's in college that may or may not graduate next year. Should I say there's two in college? Usually for things like this, right? Obviously, this is an unknown. We would usually err on the side to say, well, we know that if there's two in college, that's going to help us from a financial aid standpoint. If it's a legitimate coin flip at this point, we would say err on that side. Right now, obviously, if the student does end up graduating, you only have one in school, then that's something that's going to be disclosed to the colleges after the fact. But again, I would err on that side until you're proven otherwise. I think we're in pretty good shape here, Peg. I think we
Yeah. One other last question I see are about merit offered by, is merit aid offered by colleges without the parents requesting it? Most merit aid is your child is automatically considered for it. Some schools have other merit awards. It could be even bigger, like full tuition or full ride kind of stuff that require a separate app. But most of the time it's not that case. But there could be deadlines as far as make sure you have your application for admission in. A very common one is December 1st, right? So if merit's the name of the game for you, you want to get some merit scholarships, you got to look up those deadlines and you got to know that, because if your child applies regular admission and doesn't send it in till January, you might be leaving money on the table. But most of them, in answer to your question, do not require an extra application. Okay, well, you're welcome, everybody. I see everybody thanking us in the chat. Much appreciated.
Yep. Glad everybody. Yeah, great question tonight too, by the way. Very engaged.
Yeah, well, Matt, thank you for that. It was amazing to have
No, it
you
was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah.
back taking care of everybody is great. So, well, everybody, thanks so much for coming. Again, look for that email from us tomorrow, and then also be on the lookout for your free access coming up the pike really soon. And everybody have a great evening.
Good night, everybody. Go squeeze your kids.
All right.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.